Okay, yep, so this is lecture 5. This is going to be all about intro to texturing. If you are taking CG, this will be a little primer or maybe a refresher. I don't know how far along the course has gotten to this point. And then we'll talk about Substance Painter very slowly. Unfortunately, just the way the schedule is, we have just this one class of space available for texturing. So it'll be this one class, hopefully this lab with Josiah, and assignment number 2. So that's more or less all the time we have to talk about texturing individual props. It's not a lot of time, but we'll do as much as we can in that time. So before we talk about the textures, I want you to understand a little bit more about why we're actually building these textures, what they do, how we make them, and how that all fits into the grand scheme of actually rendering our game. So if you hate the graphic stuff, don't worry, this won't be in depth. Jason?
What's the slide?
The slides, they are here. I'll just make them public. Publish that, and I'll publish the weekly activity now. It should be live. Okay, that should be the slides and the weekly activity up. So there are a lot of steps that our game engines and render engines have to go through to make our game actually print to the screen like this from our empty, blank, sad, decrepit worlds. We're adding all this life and detail, and the computer is going to turn it into a bunch of pixels that it can put on the screen through what's known as a rendering pipeline. Parts of these pipeline are going to be fixed, and parts of this pipeline are going to be changeable based on yourself or just depending on the program you're using. But generally, they're all going to follow this same structure to some extent. Okay, so this is ripped straight from OpenGL. It's something I don't think you guys work with directly, but unknowingly, you've been using OpenGL this entire time. If you've rendered in Blender, you're using OpenGL. If you've opened the Unity project, you're using OpenGL. So whether or not you actually know it, you are interacting with it, and this is the steps that are going on in the back end. So each one of these little rectangles is a shader of some kind, more or less. It's a step in the rendering pipeline. Some of these are fixed, like I said. They're going to be built into whatever engine or program you're using, and some of them you can change, such as your lighting model. So earlier I talked a bit about why we triangulate things before we put them into the game. Well, one of the things that's fixed here is if I look at our primitive assembly, that's something that's fixed. Most of these ones that are yellow are the ones that are considered fixed. So whatever program I'm using, maybe it's Unreal, maybe it's Unity, they've got their own in-house custom, you can't touch it, primitive assembly process. And whether that means they make the triangles this way or this way, right, it's going to change between programs, which is why we want to do that all ahead of time in Blender, right? It leaves no room for interpretation for these shaders to do something different than we're expecting them to. Those first ones are going to handle geometry. We don't really need to worry about that too much. That doesn't affect us. We just need to have good game-ready topology. And the big one down there at the bottom is going to be your fragment shader, which handles your lighting, drawing to screen, as well as your texturing. So we just spent a whole kind of week and a half, 2 weeks talking about UVs. The way that our textures actually get onto these models in the game is by these shaders down here. So the fragment shader is going to take those UV positions and then take every pixel on our texture that's in the UV and pop it where it belongs on the 3D mesh. Okay? You don't need to remember all this. This is just an overview of how this stuff works to help you understand what's going on. So here's the general process. So you know, whenever you try to render an object in the 3D scene, you'll be starting with placing vertices. This is how the computer draws it step by step. You can't see them on here because the slide, but trust me, there are 4 tiny dots, or I guess 8 tiny dots making up each corner of the cube. Okay? Tiny little vertices. The next step in that process is it's going to create triangles. So this is why we have to keep our topology a relatively low amount. You can see we're iterating multiple times on the topology, and if we have 3 million triangles, it's going to take forever to render. The last step in that geometry process is actually filling the faces in, and that's what makes our object full. It does not account for our lighting or anything else yet. This is just the model. Right? So right there, it's just full white. There's no lighting. Then it'll draw the textures. So this is where it actually uses those UVs to take whatever textures we created and smack them onto the model. There's still no lighting at this point, though. That's the final step in our fragment shader where we handle the lighting and shading. and all of the additional lighting information that we're going to provide it with the textures that we'll create in Painter in a little bit. Okay, so that's the general process. That's the workflow. That's how it goes. You'll explore that more in CG if you take it. Drawing lighting is kind of the last step, and we can change how the lighting is drawn. What does this mean as far as what we need to work with as 3D artists? Well, each version or package is going to use their own rendering pipeline. Even within a specific program such as Unity or Blender, we're going to have multiple rendering pipelines. Okay? And the stuff that we build in these specific shader languages, whether it's for Unity URP or Unity HDRP, right? URP being the universal render pipeline, HDRP the high definition render pipeline, it's changing which one of these you can actually edit yourself, changing how many there are and what order they're in. That's the biggest thing happening between these different shading models, right? So URP is much more user-friendly. All the shaders are built in. You don't need to tweak a lot to make something that looks good. HDRP, they expect you to know how the render pipeline works and what parts you can build your own fragment shaders and vertex shaders and yada, yada, yada. Okay? Within Blender, we have a similar situation. We've got Blender Cycles and Blender Eevee. Each one works a little bit differently. Back in my day, when I just started with Blender, if you were going to build a material for Cycles, you had to actually build a second material for Eevee. They were not interchangeable. It didn't work very well together. Blender eventually built that BSDF shader, and then that kind of works between both sort of well, but there are still inconsistencies, right? So even within the same program, the different shading pipelines need different inputs from us to work, okay? Which means they're not compatible across themselves either. So the stuff that you build for Unity HDRP shaders, for example, or Cycles shaders are not transferable in most cases to something like Unity. Some things are, for example, if you build up a shader in Blender and then make a material out of it, you'll notice that if you create image textures one-to-one and then put your image texture in the image texture slot for base color, it will transfer into Unity and create a new shader material with your image put in the base color slot, but that's not going to work for a lot of other things, and especially none of the procedural things. So if I build a shader like this based on the Blender noise parameters, for example, to get me nice procedural roughness across my mesh when I don't even need UVs, that's great for Blender, great for rendering here. If I try to export this to an engine, none of that's going to come with me. I'll end up with that checker material, yes, because it's just an image. Oh, sorry, I won't even get the texture, the color checkerboard, sorry, because that's a built-into Blender node, right? If this was an image texture, for example, that we UV'd, then that would carry over, but none of this will carry over. So one of the biggest pitfalls is people will start Googling how to texture in Blender. Thing is, when you Google those tutorials for texturing in Blender, usually we're talking about building things for Blender, and you guys are building it for games. So it's a little bit different. Just be more proactive in your search for resources. That's the main thing I want to get across, right? So we can't always control the rendering pipeline. It's true. It is what it is. But we want to get similar results across the board, whether it's in Blender, Unreal, Unity. The stuff that we're making, we want to see it, put it in the game, and then it should look the same. So how can we actually get consistent results between different pipelines? Anybody want to take a guess? There's one thing that all of these shaders have in common. Every material you've ever worked with, it's going to ask you for one thing. And they all share this commonality. Textures. They're 2D. I can put any textures in any shader and I can make it do whatever I want, but it's consistent. Because as long as I build a shader that does a similar thing with the similar textures, it's going to look the same in basically every program. And the version of textures and shaders that we're expecting to support, for the most part, with all the work we're doing and kind of what we're targeting in this course, is PBR textures. So not the cheap beer, but physically based rendering. Okay. So physically based rendering is a form of rendering and shading model that is built around trying to replicate real life object properties as close as possible. So if I was to point at this desk, for example, and we tried to break it down into different properties that our engine could replicate, we end up with essentially 5. You can make more, you can make less, but there are 5 key ones that are going to be used basically all the time. Okay. That is albedo or diffuse, normals, roughness, ambient occlusion, and metalness. So we're going to talk a bit about what each of these does. This is going to be the most important part of your texturing. So in this course, we're aiming specifically for realism. That's just the teaching way of doing things. If you're aiming for more stylized approaches to things, this is a little bit less applicable because you can tweak these to your liking. In this case, though, for what we're talking about, I'm going to be focusing on realism. So albedo diffuse is your base color value. Assuming there is no lighting in your scene, no lights at all, what color is your object going to be? And this is a really tricky thing to actually figure out. It's a lot harder than you might anticipate because every color you see in real life is absorbing some other color from something. Take this wall, for example. It's cyan, yeah, but if you just look at it right now the way it is, it's absorbing all that light from the back, from the sun, from the window, from the outside of the class. If I were to walk over here and smack all these light switches, sorry for your eyeballs. Of course, the one light that's right beside the wall, that would prove my point the best. Oh, there it goes. Okay. It's now a different color than it was like 10 seconds ago, right? Your eyes are perceiving both the wall's color, the lighting off of it, and the ambient lighting around it. So it's actually kind of complicated to figure out what albedo values you're going to be rocking. One thing to note is, in real life, we don't have objects with super high saturations. So all of the objects we make, we're going to kind of dial back somewhere to this 50% saturated or less range. If you're working with like the classic hue saturation value slider, our saturations are typically going to want to be more towards the left here. And the reason for that is simple. When you go to light your games, a huge component of lighting your games is making it look good with all the textures around it. And when all of your colors are super duper saturated, your lights won't have that same opportunity to make your scene blend together and feel whole. So I don't expect you to remember this right now. We'll talk about that a bit more when we talk about engine stuff. I believe it's right after reading week. We're going to come back and actually hop into engine and start talking about putting things together. But just know that when you're making your albedo or your diffuse maps, you're going to want to kind of stick to a lower saturation range. Next we talked about, I think I just skipped one. Next we talked about roughness. And roughness actually comes in 2 forms. There's roughness if you're using literally anything that's not Unity. And then for some reason, there's gloss. Although actually Unity even might have switched over by now, to be honest. I don't think I know anywhere that uses gloss anymore. Just know they're the same thing, but inverted. So if we have a roughness value of 0, think something like a polished mirror or, I don't know, your dad's new sports car that he really loves and he just wipes it down for hours and hours and hours. Not a single scratch, dent, or piece of dust. That's where we're going to be at a roughness value of 0. Okay? And so on our actual textures, I put these little bars here. On our actual textures, we're going to be looking at black. So anywhere that's black on a roughness texture, so if I just hop up here, roughness texture there, the darker areas are going to be smoother and reflect light more crispy. And the lighter values are going to be rougher and diffuse that light more. Okay? When a surface is rough, it has a lot of opportunity for the light to bounce into it and then scatter in a bunch of different directions as opposed to in one clean line. So the result of that is, as we see here, much smoother, sharper reflections. Okay? You'll also notice there's a huge diminishing value between, all of this, right? 0 to 0.25, pretty obvious. 0.25 to 0.5, pretty obvious. And then everything beyond 0.5, you can hardly tell the difference. So generally, we want these textures to be somewhere in this range, kind of in the lower 3/4 where we have the most sort of flexibility with it. There are some objects that you'll find that are truly a roughness of 1, but it's few and far between. Next is metalness. So this is our third texture now. We've got color, we've got roughness, and now we've got metalness. Okay? And this one is really simple. This is a relatively recent addition to PBR as of like, I think 10 years ago. I'm pretty sure when I started doing this, it was like just invented. But it allows us to determine if things are metal or not. And for the most part, and for all of your intents and purposes, we don't have things that are 0.5 metal, right? Either something is metallic or it's not metallic. This used to be something called specular highlighting. So if you've seen that, maybe use an old version of Unity or something. Back in the day, we had to take a surface and tell the engine what color light should be if reflected off the surface and how strong that should be. And we did that with something called specular reflection values. That's super complicated. That's annoying. Different metals had different ways of refracting light. Gold, for instance, compared to platinum. We don't like that. That's annoying. So they invented metalness so that artists instead could just go, okay, this object is metal, or boom, this object is not metal. Super simple. This is the easiest one you're going to remember all day. Next is normal maps. You're going to make a lot of money making normal maps. These things are incredibly powerful, and they take our lighting model and break it down from working on a face-to-face basis on our model to pixel to pixel. So if you make this grandeur big object and it's got like 20 faces because it's, I don't know, just super low poly, you can make it look as high poly as you want, more or less, using normal maps. There's a technique called baking that I'm not going to introduce here. That's something for modeling too. But you'll go into creating super high definition meshes that do have millions of triangles and baking them down to super low definition meshes. For now, just know that we can add details like fabric textures or indented details without actually having to add any geometry. So on this mesh, none of this is geometry. It is just a texture that the renderer will use to calculate how the lighting should bounce and creates this fake depth. Last is ambient occlusion. Some engines use this, some don't. It depends. UE5, if you're using Lumen, it kind of uses ambient occlusion, but not really. Unity makes the most use out of it because it doesn't have as good lighting calculations. So ambient occlusion is anywhere that two objects are really close together, like a gap in between these two objects. Or, I don't know, if you have like a mouse in between the different parts of the mouse, that light cannot reach, right? So light will bounce and fade over time, and so in these little crevices, light kind of stops. It can't get there, it fades out. And we get this self-shadowing. That's based on the geometry. For a game engine to actually light this thing and like calculate the little bounces into the corners, way too much work. So we have these ambient occlusion textures that help us sort of fake those details even when they're not present through the actual lighting itself. Okay, so that's our big five. Jason?
So is roughness less about how like bumpy something is, but more like whether or not it's like reflective?
Yeah, it works sort of in tandem, but your bumps and things like that are going to come from your normals, and then your roughness is more, yeah, just how smooth something is as far as reflection goes, less so the actual physical smoothness of the object. I don't know if I have it, but I could show an example in this texture. Can I zoom in? No? So see, in this texture, it's kind of hard to tell without context, but this is an old family camera I did, and this is sort of like the vinyl wrapping on the outside, So it's got a lot of detail in the normal map here, right, where we've got that bumpy, grainy vinyl texture. But on the roughness, you see it's a totally different pattern on that same part of my UV. So this part, it's not matching the bumpiness, that's just being handled by the normal map. This part is like, where is my finger smudging? What are parts of the mesh that might get dirty or dusty over time and will become less smooth?
Does it kind of mean like matte?
Yeah. It's more like matte or matte or glossy. Yeah. So 0 being more matte. Cool. All right. So what's great about these shaders is that we can use what's great about these textures is that we can use them in basically any shaders and get the same result. So whether I'm putting these into Unreal Engine or Blender or Unity or whatever else, Sketchfab even, sorta, kinda, I can get the same result. In this case, it's just a black sphere. It's not that interesting, but the point still stands. How do we actually generate these textures, though? That's the end goal, right? We need these textures. How do we actually create them? Well, that's where I introduce you to Substance Painter. So this is the real meat and potatoes of everything. If you have any questions about that theory stuff, please do ask now, because I'm kind of wrapping that up. It's not super crucial that you understand the theory, but just know the different parts of the materials we're making, why we're making them, and then now we'll go over how to make them. Sound good? All right. So if you don't have Substance Painter installed, please install it now. I have like 4 more slides, and then it's going to be going through and working through it with you. At the end of last class, I had most of these slides already. So if you stuck around for the last 10 minutes last week, you'd already be ahead of the game. But Substance Painter is a texturing package that allows us to create these textures, preview them in its 3D viewer, and then export these textures for not only PBR, but all kinds of other purposes. You can make custom shaders that do all kinds of things. I forgot my hard drive. I was going to demonstrate a few, but maybe I'll just bring the hard drive after reading week and go over them. It's a complex program, Substance Painter. It will take some getting used to, absolutely. I want to take things slowly with you here as we get used to everything. My layout is probably different than yours right off the bat as well, so I will be taking extra time. I don't know what the 2025 layout looks like, but I'll be using 2021, I believe, because that's when I purchased it, and I don't have one of those floating subscriptions. I got a lifetime one, so it is going to look different on yours than mine. If I click on something and it's not there for you, please just yell at me. Go, hey, Marcus, we don't have that, or vice versa, so that I know to go find it somewhere else that I can also demonstrate it for you. I didn't finish that sentence apparently, but that's supposed to say if you don't already have it downloaded, please go to the Adobe Creative Cloud portal and you'll find it there. Okay. This is one last note. This is sort of both a slide and an introduction to your next assignment. I will be using this slide to demonstrate, but basically we've gone through and we've created all of these nice models. We've created all of these nice UVs. Now using Substance Painter, we're going to texture both of these in tandem. So Substance Painter allows us to texture an object in 3D or in 2D. It syncs the two views up so we can work from the UVs to the model or from the model to the UVs, depending on the situation. If you're somebody who's a huge fan of hand painting, you can stick a Photoshop file in and paint to the UVs and have your whole mesh done that way. Or you can bring the 3D model into Painter, the way we're going to today, and use all kinds of procedural generators and masks and things like that to build up those 5 textures. So we're going to be using Painter, and this is going to be your assignment. I'm not going to do the hammer right now. This is just up there for example. I'll make it live in a second too. For assignment 2, it is a sort of pre-built assignment. That's why I hadn't posted anything about it yet, even though we hadn't done any texturing. It's opening today, so I've just posted the files today for actually starting the assignment, and it's due on the 20th. I had it due on the 6th. That was my mistake. It was supposed to open on the 6th, which is today, and then it's due on the 20th. So you can go now, but I wouldn't recommend starting that until at least after the class, so you've got a decent idea of what's going on. To be honest, just because of how complex Substance Painter is, I would recommend you don't even start this till after Josiah's tutorial, after the weekly, because you'll have to do more texturing during the weekly, and then hopefully you'll have a better starting off point for how to approach texturing the hammer.
I have a question for the assignment.
Yep.
Are we allowed to use like models to use like other things?
No, it's this. It's specifically a hammer.
Oh.
It's like 1-to-1, you'll be modeling what's provided, or texturing what's provided. So you just have to UV unwrap it. I guess I'll explain it now since we're sort of in the midst of it. I was going to explain it at the end, but I'll explain it now. So I've posted this file right here, hammer texture assignment. And if I go to actual assignment 2 texturing, So your goal is to texture an existing model. I'll be looking for visual interest and storytelling elements. So this one's very open-ended. The last one was like build exactly this thing. This one's open-ended. Texture it to your heart's content. Write a story around it. Do whatever you'd like. Take as long as you want on it, as long as it's before the 20th. So what I've done is got everything set up in Blender. If you download this file right here, Hammer Blender file, and just stick it somewhere, you will be graced with a generic looking hammer. And I accidentally opened it in 4.0, so it's probably going to freak out. Execution of Python scripts, you could probably ignore that. There's just something built into the file. You just need the model. So anything that's not just the model, you can ignore. So open. Okay. The UVs are broken right now. I broke them. You're going to have to figure out the UVs on your own. You don't have to necessarily replicate the UVs that I made. In the example submission, it's just make good UVs, right? You know the principles for good UVs now, trying to maximize usage of space, trying to straighten the islands we can, right? So it doesn't need to necessarily look like mine, but you are trying to build good UVs, okay? If you don't build good UVs, it'll be impossible to texture it well, so do keep that in mind. Spend some time on the UVs, it's worthwhile. But yeah, simple hammer. Everything is applied to scale. It's fairly low poly, so it should be pretty easy to work with. Your job is just going to be UV unwrap it, export it as an FBX, however you choose, or go back to one of the previous lectures with the FBX exporting slide to figure out what settings you want to use. Export it somewhere, import it to Substance Painter, texture it. And then give me a nice pretty render of it somehow, however you'd like, afterwards. So that's assignment number 2. You can also upload your final submission to Sketchfab. That works as well. Or if you want to submit via screenshots, because I know that's super simple, just UVs, show me the checker texture, the checker material texture on the object itself, and then an actual rendered somehow version of the object, right? So this will show you how you can actually use those textures. If it's in Blender, then you'll have to export those textures for Blender and put them in Blender, or etc. Okay, any questions about that? I imagine some will come up as the weeks go on and you're actually starting the assignment. Feel free to holler to me or Josiah and we'll help you out. Okay, breakdown's pretty simple. 5 points for the UVs themselves and then 5 points for the actual texturing. So I am looking for realism here. Something to note, try to go for realism just for this assignment, trying to push that kind of understanding of PBR materials before you break into the more cartoony stuff. That way you'd just be able to get the most out of the program. If you're just going super hand-painted, you could do it in Blender and not use Substance at all. So this way it kind of forces you to use Painter and all of its available options. Okay, so think about the different properties of your materials that you're going to use. How does it shine in the light? Is it rough? Is it matte? Is the surface going to be clean or covered in dirt? Right? Is the surface metallic? Is it not metallic? Okay. It doesn't need to be realistic as far as the materials themselves. When I say aiming for realism, I mean as far as rendering and shading and things like that. If you want to make a hammer made of gold, well, not realistic, that's still totally cool. Maybe you want to make one out of diamond. I had one of my third year students do that. Go for it. Right? I don't mean realistic as far as textures themselves. You can make it as surreal as you want, but do try to focus in on some kind of story and the details, right? In this case, I made a quick one. It's more matte here in the middle where your hand would go because your hand is going to wear down on that shiny surface over time, right? And it's more shiny into these crevices where your hand doesn't go. I've got just chips and edge damage on the hammer where it would sit against the table or whatever if you put it down, as well as a lot of scratches around the head of the hammer from when you're using it, right? Head of the hammer, and the same thing here as well. This area is more chipped up than, say, this part here, right? Because why would this part get damaged? We'll talk more about texturing with intent as we go through this example, but that's assignment 2, okay? So if you have any questions, like I said, give us a holler. We'll help you out. Okay, so let's take a quick look at the Painter interface. Hopefully you've all got it opened up. There's a lot. It's like
Still downloading.
still downloading. It will take a while. It will take a while. For now, I'd say just follow along. Then when it downloads, try to catch up with the slides. So we have a lot to look at. It's sort of like this random mishmash. If like Unreal or Unity and Photoshop had a baby, we get Substance Painter. So just like those two programs, we've got a big content browser for all of our assets, as well as a bunch of tabs with a bunch of different types of assets in them. We'll talk about what's in each of those later. We've got a Properties tab. Just like if you click on an object in Unity, if you click on a layer here, you'll end up with a bunch of different properties. Properties mainly is referring to those 5 properties I talked about earlier. So if it's in the Properties tab, it probably relates to either diffuse, albedo, normals, metallic, roughness, or AO. And it doesn't even really account for AO. So one of those other 4, you're going to find in the properties. You've got a Layers tab. How many of you have used Photoshop? I hope most all of you. I hope a lot of you are just not putting your hand up, because that's only like 8 people, so that would be a little tough. But, or Krita or any painting program, right? If you've used something with layers, you'll kind of understand what's going on here. Layers build upwards, so things at the bottom are going to be at the bottom, and things on top will show on top. And we also, the big thing we're going to be working with is blend modes. So even if you've used Photoshop, you maybe haven't used blend modes before. Things like multiply, add, divide. Lucas?
Just out of curiosity, because one thing that Photoshop and Illustrator is not really good with is making masks. How, like, does Substance Painter has like a good masking tool?
Yes, that's actually all we're doing.
Oh, for real?
We are building masks. Just the whole goal with Painter is to build a mask for every layer. So you might have a layer that's your base paint. Build a mask for where that paint goes. Then you'll have a layer for dirt. Build a mask for where that dirt goes. So we're just building things up, building block by building block in masks. That's essentially what Substance Painter is built for.
Nice.
So yeah, we'll be doing a lot of that. So this line is very hard to see, but there is a line there separating this into 2 viewports. One is your 2D viewport, so just like you have the UV window in Blender, where it's like one off to the side, and then the 3D viewport on the other side. So we've got the same thing. UV is on one side in the 2D viewport, and on the right, the 3D viewport. And then last but not least, Tools panel, same kind of place as Blender with your tools that you need. These tools are more like Photoshop tools. We've got the paint bucket tool, we've got the drawing tool, eraser, all that good stuff. But here's the caveat, and I mentioned this at the end of the last class as well. Blender is weird. The hotkeys that you learn to use for navigating in Blender's 3D view, so middle mouse and shift for panning, things like that, not how Painter works. Painter is built on the industry standard kit. So if you've ever used Maya before, this is super simple to translate to, or Marmoset or anything like that, or ZBrush, all of those programs are built on this style of hotkeys. So rather than changing this one to Blender's, I would recommend getting used to these ones, because these are actually going to be the ones that you're using in every other program you work in for the most part. Right? Blender is the odd one out, and so it's good to have both in your kits.
Is there any way to change the keys in Blender to?
There is. When you do a fresh install of Blender, it'll pop up and ask you to import your hotkeys, and under the drop down for import hotkeys, it will say, do you want Blender standard hotkeys or industry standard hotkeys?
Oh,
so you can change it. Like I said, I'd recommend leaving it as it is in Blender. Probably you're just more familiar with it that way, and then learning this as well. So having both sets is pretty good. Okay, so if we're going to be orbiting around the object, it's going to be Alt-click. These are in the slides. Maybe pop them open beside you if you get confused about how to do something in the viewport. Control-Alt-click is the pan. So in Blender, that would be Shift and middle mouse. And then zooming is the same as Blender. It's just scrolling up and down on the mouse wheel. Pretty simple. One other caveat that this program does that Blender does not. If I Alt-click or Control-Alt-click, it's going to move from my mouse. So if I point my mouse at something, you look in the little mouse wheel example here, I point my mouse at that corner and it zooms into that corner. I point my mouse at the bottom, it zooms into the bottom. So the navigation in Painter feels a little bit weird because it's based on your cursor's position. So if you just throw your cursor into the corner and start navigating, your mesh is just going to go flying. That's what's going on. Okay. If your mesh goes flying, press F. It'll bring it back to the middle. The other one I want you to know before we actually get started and dive on in is the brush. Something that happens all the time is you'll see your little circle, and unlike in some other programs, the brush and the eraser look identical. So there's like a 90% chance if you're painting and nothing's happening, you've accidentally just ended up in the eraser mode, and it's really hard to tell. So 1 is for brush, and 2 is for eraser. Okay, so we're going to take our time, because like I said, there's a lot to that. But I'm going to go ahead and open up Substance Painter right now.
Also, I feel you put Shift, Alt, and click to pan, right? I don't know if that's correct, but on mine, at least on the 2025 version, it's much more snapping to positions.
Is it Shift Alt and or Control Alt?
It's
Control Alt and click.
Alt.
Yeah, these ones here. Alt middle click to orbit, Control Alt. Yeah. Shift Alt middle click will snap your view to one of the orthographic views. So that's sometimes useful as well. So here we go. Painter is open. And I don't know why Painter loves doing this Discord overlay thing, but that is getting nuked. Okay. So if you're with me, please follow along as much as you can. I'm going to be going slow. Right now, we have an empty scene, which doesn't really do anything for us. So what I'm going to do is go up to File, and there's an option to open sample. Unfortunately, unlike Blender, there isn't a plugin that will show my hotkeys here, so we're just kind of having to go without. I will say what I'm doing as much as I can, though. So I'm going to hit Open Sample, and if you've installed it, it should open a bunch of sample projects that you can open. And so pick any one you'd like, just open something so you have something to work with. I'd recommend probably either the Jade Toad or Meat Matte or the Preview Spear, since those are pretty cut and dry. So in this case, I'll just open Meat Matte. And Matt is Substance Painter's mascot, who is also really good as a test base. So if you've ever done 3D printing, you know that there's the boat, I don't remember what it's called, Boaty. The boat, yeah, the boat is like the standard print model, right? Meat Matte here is going to be our standard material checker. Okay. So I'm pressing Alt and clicking, and that's going to let me orbit around. So if you have a file like this open, try orbiting to the front of him, then try orbiting to the back, to the top. Try and get to all those different views that I was trying to get you accustomed to in Blender, right? Alt and click. So I'm just holding down Alt. Just holding down Alt and moving around. So the navigation like this is pretty simple, but you'll see if I start clicking on random parts, I'm going to end up in this weird situation where I'm rotating around a part that I really don't want to.
Control Z is still the same, right?
Control Z is still the same.
That was different than I think the word where
So now I'm navigating, and when I'm orbiting around this really awkward point on the front of his head. That's kind of weird. I don't really like that. It's going to be hard to navigate. If any point you end up in a situation like that, you can just press F, and F will fit them back to frame. So now when I orbit again, it's rotating around the center like I would expect it to. And I'm still just holding Alt and rotating. If I hit Shift, I can snap to those views. So now I'm Alt and Shift. But generally speaking, you don't need to use that so much, and you can focus on Alt. Okay. If I want to zoom into his feet, I just put my cursor on the foot, zoom on in. If I want to zoom out of his foot, keep the first cursor on the foot, zoom out with the mouse wheel. Okay. Then I can do the same thing for the face.
How do you switch to cursor?
The what?
How do you switch to cursor?
Switch? It's based on whatever mode you're in. So by default, you're in the painting mode. So it's the painting cursor. Okay. So I'm going to go back to look at the front view. And I'm going to hit Control and Alt, and that's pan. So I can Control Alt, and now I'm panning.
Very serious problem.
Okay. You should be able to get pretty good at navigating around the mesh. I can go from the front to the bottom, lock in the bottom, go to the top, lock in the top. Okay. Great. Actually, your view probably looks like this. Yep.
So there's a feature in Substance which is the big dimension maps. So what do we use that for?
We're not going to worry about that now. That's more of a modeling 2 thing when we're dealing with high polys and low polys to bake details down. We'll explore that a little bit, but generally, yeah, that's more of something we'll do next year. I just want to get you guys introduced on the ground to how these textures and maps are built, and then if there's extra time, we can talk about how to bake mesh maps and use them to create better textures. Yeah. So to get to this view where I've got both side by side, I just went up here to this little half window, and you can split it by 2D and 3D, which is pretty useful if you want to work on both sides at once. Personally, I just work in 3D, so I usually just hide the UVs unless I need them. Or you can go 2D only if you want it to be 2D only. Or depending on your setup, some people like to work with the 3D over there. I prefer to have it in the middle of my screen, so I use this one, swap 3D and 2D. Okay, and I'm just going to hide the 2D again because I don't feel like I need it. So let's look at what's available to us right now from a property side of things. In the top right, we've got the texture set list. And this is kind of a bad example because the objects that we're exporting for games, we typically don't want them to have this many materials. But in this case, it's broken down into the head material, body, and base material. Okay, so each one of these is its own material. So if we were in Blender, right, that would be like giving this a material and calling it top, giving this a material and calling it piece 2, giving this a material and calling it piece 3, right? We don't want to do that. We just want to take all of this and give it one material called hammer. Okay. So this is not exactly how we would do it for games. I'm going to just switch over to the preview sphere because that only has one material. Great. So the preview sphere is going to come with a bunch of extra stuff, but we can sort of get it out of the way because we're not going to need it. So up here we can see we have a texture set list. So as far as our different materials go, we just have the one for sphere. And right now sphere is working in a 2K resolution, so 2048 by 2048. And you can see it's using the main shader. So we can actually make other shader instances within Painter. So let's say we're trying to replicate a more stylized look. We can recreate that shader here using new shader instance. For now, just going to leave it as main shader. So if we click the 2048 here, the 2K, we can change the scale of our textures. So if you're working along and your computer is coming to a grinding halt every time you make a change, consider knocking your textures down. So now I'm working at 4 times less resolution than I just was, which means it's going to render 4 times faster, basically, right? And I can work at 512 for as long as I want, and then I can switch it to 1024 when I want to export. Okay, so that way I keep my file fast while I'm working. I'm going to delete all these layers here. Okay. So all of this navigation is the same as all the other stuff we just did. Under layers, right now it's empty, but we can add layers just like we would in Photoshop. There is one key difference though. Here in Painter, we actually have 2 different kinds of layers. So in Photoshop, you know, you've got a rasterized layer, pretty simple. You paint on it and it shows up. Here we have 2 different kinds of layers. One is called a fill layer, and one is called a paint layer. So over here, this bar, I've got one paintbrush looking symbol and one paint bucket looking symbol. If I click the paintbrush, it's going to add a new layer, just called layer 1, This is a new paint layer. So this paint layer now works like Photoshop. If I drag my cursor over here, I click 1 to go into the brush, and I draw, I am now drawing on the mesh. Okay, and if I open the 2D view, you'll see it's also saving that to the texture. And I can actually go the other way too, where I draw on the texture, and it shows up on the mesh. Okay, so I'll just undo that real quick. Control Z is still undo. There's another thing that we can do with these paint layers though that makes them super cool. Our paint brush itself also doesn't work the way that Photoshop's does. So when you're painting in Photoshop, you can paint specifically color. That's all you can paint in Photoshop is color. But here, we can paint any one of those properties I was talking about earlier. So let me pull up this properties tab for my paintbrush. So you can see I have an alpha, just like I would in Photoshop for my brush. Parameters for hardness, so I can have a soft or a hard brush. But down here is where the real magic happens. Under the Material tab, I can control all of the properties of my brush, not just the color. I can change the metalness, the roughness, the normals, the height. So for example, if I come in here, let's make my brush color red. Let's make it a metallic value of 1 and a roughness value of 0.1. So the object has a very low roughness value, meaning it's very shiny. It has a metallic value of 1, it's metallic, and it's red. Okay. Now when I paint with this brush, I'm painting all of those properties. You can see, especially along the edge, I'm now painting this metal onto this object. So I'm changing all 5 properties at once. Okay? You'll notice I have the option to change different amounts of properties. So here, color, metal, roughness, normal height, other things. These are the main 5 though. If we click on color, you'll notice that color will disappear from our stack. And now if I paint, I'm not painting color, but I am painting everything else. So you see it's not even affecting my other color values because I'm no longer interacting with them. If I set the metallic back to 0, okay, I'm going to remove the metallicness. So I can change the brush size with Control and middle mouse wheel. Just make it bigger here. So I'm now painting away the metallicness, but you see it's not affecting the base color at all. I'm just painting away the metalness. And if I get rid of the metalness, I can do just the roughness. So if I just set the roughness back to 0.3 like it was by default, I can paint away all the roughness. Okay? And then finally I can come back to color, click my eraser, and just erase the color. So I could even, with the eraser, decide to do all of these values for something. Okay, paint in this shiny red. But then go back and decide I don't want it to be red. Right? Get rid of all my other properties. Change the base color to something else. And it will stay metallic and it will stay shiny, but now I can paint in the blue.
So you can make a nice texture.
Yeah, you can make all kinds of textures. But here's the thing. While that's great that I can quickly change and make up different decisions, it's not perfect. Because you see now if I want to get rid of some of this red, like I've got to be very meticulous with where I paint, and that's kind of annoying and everything. So what else can we do? This is where we introduce the second kind of layer that we have. Okay? So the paint layer is destructive. Think of it like modeling and doing a bevel with Control B. It's destructive. You do Control B, you bevel it, boom. It's now beveled. That's it. It's beveled. Right? You want to undo it, you got a lot of manual work out of you. It's still possible, but it's a lot of manual work. Let's say use the bevel modifier. Okay? That's what I'm going to compare the fill layers to. So let me add a fill layer here. You'll notice on my UV side, it's just made this box. And it's going to fill that box with these 5 properties. So if I go down here, color, height, roughness, metalness, normal. Again, ignore these 2. That's not what we're going to work with. We're just working with these 5. Yep, Burr.
Because it took me a while to like actually get it. Oh, it's downloaded. I was going to say it's still downloading.
Okay.
I was going to ask if the lecture was recorded.
It's recorded, yeah. At least if I press.
It says it's downloaded now.
Yeah.
It wasn't like what I started asking. I'm pretty sure.
Cool. Now I'm recording. This will all be here. It'll be uploaded right after class, so it'll be good. Okay. So the fill layer now is doing what the paintbrush did, but across the entire mesh, all at once. So you notice now if I click, right, I'm on my brush, I click, this little thing's gonna pop up. It's gonna say fill layers are not paintable. Okay, I can't paint on my fill layer. It's always going to affect everything. So let's change this now. So let's make it red. Okay, by just clicking on a property, I can bring up a window to change it. I'm making this red. I'd recommend following along, get used to changing all of these values. Under roughness, let's make this, super smooth, just like we did the last one. And under metal, just gonna drag this up to 1.
So Marcus,
Yep.
just question about how this 2 panel works. The other panel is the UV upper mesh, but it's also based on your scene, right?
It's just the UVs. There's no seams in this. So the seams are in Blender. We mark the seams. Scene? Oh, yes. If you move the lighting, yeah. If you move the lighting, it will affect the UVs. So it's replicating not only the UVs, but the texture on them, and the lighting as well. There are options to change that though, which I'll talk about in a bit. Everybody still with me on this stuff? Everybody kind of grasp what a paint layer did? Yep, Burr.
It says the driver on my GPU is outdated.
Update your GPU driver.
I don't know how to do that.
If you have an NVIDIA card, go to NVIDIA.com and search up your driver for your particular graphics card. If you have an AMD card, go to AMD.com and grab your driver from there. Okay. Yep.
So how does the substance work if you export a mirror object into
A mirrored object? The same way that anything else does when you're texturing. So if you have a mirrored texture, they're actually going to overlap. And so if you texture one side, it'll texture both. So in your case with the character's mask, right, you had that mirrored one where you drew on that red part and it goes on to both sides. Same thing here, right? Because that's being done by the UVs. That's not something that's specific to this program or any other program. It's just because the UVs are on top of each other. They're in the same spot and they're mirrored.
this work like a normal man?
Yep, exactly. Yep. Okay, so with our fill layer here, this is great. Now if I want to make any changes, I can go back and make the adjustment. All of a sudden, my art supervisor comes back and he's like, no, I hate the red. We're not doing red. We're doing blue. Boom. It's blue. Okay, now the team lead's coming by and he's saying, no. It's not supposed to be metallic. It's supposed to be non-metallic. Boom. Non-metallic. Oh, and now my artist partner comes over and says, no, I hate the roughness. Make it rougher. Boom. Don't know why everybody in my life is complaining about my art, but it is what it is. I can make the changes immediately. Right, so this is non-destructive. It's fantastic. We can work on this throughout our process and change it.
Marcus, this is what they call non-destructive material.
Yeah, we're making non-destructive materials, right? They're procedural materials, what we actually call them, procedural. It is fantastic. So there is one issue though. One issue, you probably have figured it out by now. What if I don't want my entire object to be to one material? Let's say that while we're happy with this nice matte material that we've got going on here, we want this inner circle to be a different material. Maybe that inner circle is a shiny gold, a contrast to our matte outside. This is where masks come into play. Okay? And as great as it's been changing all of our settings here, Making the masks and changing these values subtly is what's really going to make our model stand out. So this is kind of complicated and it gets pretty deep. I'd recommend, if you're following along, to just kind of watch the first time and then I'll do it a second time. So I'm going to right click on my fill layer and a bunch of options are going to pop up. Okay? But the one we're worried about is at the top here, we see add black mask. If I click that, you'll notice my material has disappeared from my object. Now masks are quite simple. Anywhere that's white in a mask, the material is going to shine through. Anywhere that's black, it's not. And anywhere that's gray is going to be a combination of the two based on opacity. So if we have this totally black mask now, obviously it's not showing up anywhere on my object, the material. We still have that blue underneath, right? Let's right click again. And I'm going to right click on this black mask, okay? Right click, and more options are going to pop up. At the bottom here, you'll see something though. We've got paint layer and fill layer. Okay? Paint layer and fill layer. Why do we have paint layer and fill layer here? We have paint layer and fill layer up there. These are not the same. They have the same name, they use the same symbol. Please understand they are not the same. If you right click and hit one of these fill or paint layers, it is a different type of layer called a sub-layer. If you right click, it will add one of those layers to one of your existing layers. I told you, it gets complex, it's kind of crazy. So every single one of my material layers, one of these big boys, right? If I right click on the mask and make a paint layer, you'll see it pops up underneath my mask, indicated by that little orange underlining bar. So this paint layer is not attached to my object at a whole level. This paint layer is specifically built in to this fill, to this material. Okay? It has no properties because it's in a mask other than black and white. So up in the top right here, a mode you'll have to use all the time when we're building these masks is your viewport shading model. So the same as in Blender, where you can switch between the matte cap or the flat lighting or the rendered. Up here we have your different texture views. By default it's set to material. Material is going to let us see our lighting values and everything else. We've got nice shadows and post-processing and yada 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 yada. If I click base color, I get just my base color, which currently doesn't exist because we have a black mask. So I'm quickly just going to remove that and I'll show you how to do it again. But we'll remove the mask. Okay, base color. We know it's blue. We put the blue there. Height, which is what we use for our normal maps, but we don't have anything there right now. Roughness, another value that came from this slider right here, right? I can adjust it. But this way I can get an isolated look at what my roughness is looking like, see if my values are too low or too high, and make adjustments. Or if we click on a mask, we can go to mask view, which in this case is pure black and white. This paint layer, like I said, because it's in the mask side of things over here, it's only black and white. You can only do black and white on this paint layer, and this is reflected in the brush. So if I click on my brush, all my properties are gone, right? Roughness, metallic, yada, 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 gone. Because I'm just working in the mask in black and white. So let's make it white and paint on my mask. Fantastic, right? So now I've got a mask that has some white values and some black values. If I switch back to my material view now, it's blue. So those areas that are white in the mask, our material is going to shine through underneath. And I can still make all of the same changes I was making before. Roughness, I can make it shiny, I can make it metallic, and I can make it red. Okay? But the material is only shining through where my mask is allowing it to. So if we want a different material to appear on this circle here, we just have to make two masks. One mask for that blue material and one mask for the gold that's going to go in the circle. So So let's do that now. We have a few different tools to help us make these masks easier. So I'm going to delete the paint layer to make it clean, and I'll just show you again how we did this. So I'll delete this. So I right-clicked on the fill layer, okay? Went to add black mask just to clear everything out. Then right-clicked again on my mask to open up the menu again, and clicked add paint layer because we're adding a paint layer. If we add a fill to our mask, right, it's going to do the same thing as a fill would to the other properties, but it's just for our mask, so black and white. Okay. You could put a texture in here for, in this case, like maybe this texture, right? And now my mask is that texture instead. Right, so that's one case where I would use a fill, because now I can move this around. But for now, let's just use a paint layer. I'll go back to material. So the paint bucket tool that we have works a little bit differently here. If I hover over it, it's not called paint bucket, it's actually called polygon fill. I'll go ahead and click it. And you'll see it brings up all of the polygons of my mesh. So polygon fill works like a paint bucket, but in 3D. So you can see I've got a slider here for color, just like my brush, and I've got 3 different fill modes. I've got triangle mode for filling out individual triangles, quad mode for filling out individual quads, mesh fill for filling out an entire mesh connected by vertices, and UV fill, which is going to go island by island. So I don't have any triangles on this mesh, so I'll skip that one, but let's click the face. If you're still following along with me, I'm going to click face here, so I'm on my mask paint layer. I'm going to click face with my polygon fill. And now if I click, you'll see it's filling in that polygon on my mask. Okay, and I can also drag select. On a model like this that's super high definition and really dense, that's not super useful to us. So we can go bigger, okay? And this is the model option. And you can see these 2 parts of the object are not actually connected by vertices. And when I click, I'm just filling in one part of the model. Okay? Yep. This mode here. Polygon fill?
I'm still updating my drivers.
That's okay. The recording will be live.
Okay, good.
So polygon fill is there, and it's going to work based on either a triangle, face, mesh, or UV island. So in UV island mode, it's going to just fill based on your seams. So if I click here, okay, it's just filling where that seam is. Same for here. Same for here. Just that seam. So let's go back to model fill. And I'm going to just fill that outside of the object that we want it to be matte and blue. So now this is visible in my mask. Just going to go back and make it blue, right? And if I click on mask view, you'll see it's made all of that part of our object white, and the material shines through. So I'll make it blue, and I'll make it matte, and I'll make it unmetallic. Okay. Now for the other part, I'm going to do the exact same thing, just in a new fill layer. Okay? But when I say new fill layer, I mean new like material level fill layer. So I'm not going to right click here. I'm going to go up to the top, and you'll see I now have another fill layer in the stack. Because these things can get super messy, it's probably good to name them. So we'll just call this one blue, and we'll call this one gold. All right. By default, gold doesn't have a mask on it, so it's just overwriting everything because layers work top down, right? If I drag it below blue, now it's not. Drag it above, now it is. So on the gold level, we'll just make it gold. a nice shiny gold, low in roughness, super metallic. And then do the same thing. I'm going to right click on my material layer and add a black mask. Right, and then I'm going to right click on the mask again to add a paint layer so I can fill in just that part. All right, paint layer down at the bottom. Okay. And now I could use my paintbrush, like I said, to paint this area in, but that seems a little excess and you're probably not going to do it very well. And we have the geometry that will help us with that, right? I could use the polygon mode, but that would take forever. So we can use the model mode to just pick this entire model. Click, gold. Okay, you can also click on the UV side. So I have this UV here. Click. It'll calculate the model on the 3D side and do the same thing. So now we've got an object, okay? If I hit Shift and right click, it will move the light around in the scene so you can get a different idea of how your model looks in different lighting. In fact, if you hold Shift, every option for the Shift hotkey will pop up on your screen. Substance is really good about this. If you hold a key, it will tell you what it can do. So I'm holding Shift. You'll see Shift plus B displays previous mesh map. Shift C display previous channel. Control Shift E export, etc., 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 etc. Right? Shift plus right click rotate environment. Okay. Alt plus Shift plus left camera snap rotate. If you hold down Control, all the control options will come up. So if you want to experiment with the different hotkeys, you can look by just holding down a hotkey and it will tell you what all you can do. Even down to something like Control S for save project. If you hold down a key, it'll tell you what it does. Is everybody with me at this point? Has everybody kind of replicated or created something with two materials like this? Barry, you're still downloading, so that's kind of just what it is. What it is.
Look at the progress of this.
Drivers are not usually fast. Yeah, you'll catch up. Yep.
Yeah, I decided to get this.
How do you select everything on your tutorial?
Everything?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
If you wanted to select everything except that inner circle, would you have to go through and click everything except that inner circle, or?
No, I use the mesh fill same way. So because I'm starting from black, you can imagine that, well, you don't have to imagine, you just look at it. If I use the model fill option, it's just going to model everything that's connected by vertices. So if I have something that's not connected by vertices, it won't get filled. So if I just click this outside portion, it doesn't click this part too, because they're actually separate objects. Like they're separate pieces in the actual mesh file. So I don't need to worry about it, polluting that other one. Let's say they were the same object. Let's say if I selected the object, it does this instead. I'm just dragging here to fill them both. Let's say it does that instead. I can switch from model view or model fill to UV fill. And now it'll fill by UVs. So now if I click, okay, I'm clicking on the outside UVs instead. So I have to pop in and do all these. Yep.
I accidentally did something and I don't know how to fix it on Substance Painter, and it's probably something we're going to teach later, but can you just quickly help me?
Yep, I could pop over quick.
I think we can go there and see if that helps.
Can you describe it quick, or is it like? Sure. Okay. Oh, sorry, Lucas. One thing.
Shift and something, and I did this to the model. Yeah, no, you can kind of see I don't know what I did. That's the thing. I was trying to just save it, and I pressed on like Shift S or something, and did this.
Like the red wireframe?
No, the checker, because it's.
It says you're in quick mask mode as opposed to mask mode.
Yeah,
I'm not sure
how do
exactly
I-
what that is. So
Oh.
probably just delete the mask.
Okay.
Okay, so it is 6:24. We have till 8. So we can either take a quick 15-minute here, come back to it, or just kind of power through it and probably finish up at like 7:40 and then be on our way. Any preferences?
I mean, if you take a break, that gives more time for my drivers to download.
It's true. Is anybody else still having issues with drivers or installing? That might help. No? Everybody else is pretty good?
Oh,
Okay.
I think it's done.
Good? Okay, perfect.
Please work.
Okay, so let's truck through it and get as much done as we can here. Was everybody more or less able to replicate what we did here? Thumbs up if you're good. Okay. That works too. Fill isn't working? Is it fill of this kind or fill in here?
Fill layer, paint layer, and then going to the polygon fill section. None of the options are just.
These ones here? If these ones aren't showing up, you're probably in, if this is all grayed out here, it means you're clicked on your fill layer. You have those, okay.
I accidentally closed the asset.
Okay, so we'll do this then. I'll take a 15-minute break here just to walk around and help the people who need individual help, and then when that's settled, we can go back and then continue from there. Sound good? So I'll pause this here. All right, so I'm just going to resume the recording here, and we'll get into this next portion of things. So what I just showed you was making fill layers, making paint layers, all well and good, and that's going to be the core foundation for everything you're going to do. You're going to want to build those paint layers, build those fill layers all on your own for the most part. But as you've probably all noticed, and most of you when I was walking around have already explored with, you'll notice we also have this asset browser rich with all kinds of stuff. We've got metals, we've got concrete, we've got gold, we've got like 16 different human skin textures for some reason. And we've got leaves and sample bullet holes and yada, 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 yada. We've got all kinds of extra properties and assets that are already made and built into Substance for you to use. Okay? All of the ones that we're looking at here by default are called base materials. Okay? And these base materials are built in, I think usually it's other program called Substance Designer, but they are here for us to use. And base materials have existing properties that we can change that the company created. So in this case, I dragged on this wood, American cherry. And if I scroll down on my material, you'll see I don't have those same options that I did before, like color, roughness, etc. They're still here, but differently. So these are now parameters that are exposed that I can access, but it mostly does the same thing. But I can change the wood roughness, the wood color, but also the fibers and layers. Okay? So fibers being one of the values, and then layers being the number of layers, I guess, in the wood, right? So these are both something that I can control from here. Okay? So those are not things that I could normally control on my texture, right? These are procedural. They're built in a program called Substance Designer. I don't think we're going to get to Substance Designer this semester. That's, again, more like a Modeling 2 thing. But you can make these base materials, and the difference between the base materials and building it from scratch is the base materials have these flexible parameters. Okay? But they're not always going to be what you need. So this is the base material tab. If you see these little 3 dots on the base material, that means it has flexible parameters. If you do not see those little 3 dots, it's not going to have those flexible parameters. Okay? To the right of that, this one takes a second to load, we have smart materials. I'll just open this up a bit more. Smart materials. So I'm going to have a lot more than you guys because I've got a library of them in a collection, but smart materials are essentially base materials that do even more based on your mesh. So we're not really going to talk about mesh maps because you have to bake those down. That's this whole other thing. But we are going to talk about how we can build them ourselves. So we can create our own smart materials. They're entirely procedural, and do extra things like edge wear and damage and things like that. So let me just grab a painted steel, plop it on top of everything, and you can see that painted steel, okay? It's also using my mesh information to create these cut off pieces where the edges are, and this dirt in our cavities where dirt would build up, right? So these are base materials that are all layered together, a bunch of different ones. So here we've got a paint layer. Sorry, we've got a fill layer that is our paint, right? So there's our paint. Roughness variation. Jason just brought up a point. Why do we need artists anymore? You can just drag and drop. So with these smart materials, fine as they are, they're immediately recognizable as smart materials, and they do tend to look bad. All right? Generally speaking, this looks like shit. This is awful. I can see this from a mile away. You submit something like this to me, I'm gonna go, that's literally the steel painted smart material. You didn't do anything. You didn't make any effort. You didn't tweak nothing. You just slapped it in, right? And you can say it looks fine, it looks good, and it looks dandy. You know, sure, maybe it does in some capacity, but the real key thing here is going to be going in and actually editing this to look better, okay? So inside of these smart materials, we can change all these different properties. So I can go down here. I don't want red paint. I want blue paint, okay? Now we have blue paint. I can go into my mask on my paint layer. So by default here, the mask, right? It's covering most of the object, but we can change the values in our mask builder, right? To be more or less messed up, right? So if I really drag this up, okay, I'm really knocking back where the paint's sitting. And now if we go back, okay, it's way more worn than it was otherwise, right? Because I've adjusted that mask, okay? The issue with smart materials, one, like I said, any seasoned artist is going to be spotting these from a mile away. If you use these in your project, I will be able to tell immediately. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, okay? I'm not advocating against using them. I'm just saying be cautious and mindful of that you need to change these and really use these to your advantage, less than just slap them on. Okay, the goal is not just slap them on, the goal is to use them to your advantage. 2, the smart material options are pretty limited. There's not a whole lot, okay? There are some nice ones. Oh, maybe I'll just drag this one on. Look at that, I've got vintage wood. Isn't that nice? You'll notice you don't have that one. Look all you want. You're not gonna find vintage wood. Okay? The reason for that, I made vintage wood from scratch and then imported it into my library. You, as the artist, shouldn't be thinking of these smart materials as the be-all, end-all. You can make your own. You're building up a library of smart materials that are yours, truly yours, to use in your projects. Okay? This is where the real money in smart materials is. It's not the fact that you can just drag and drop them and be like, whoa, painted metal. It's the fact that you can make your own to keep projects consistent, to work with other people easier, to do all kinds of things. No.
I know you said this was a little out of scope, but can you speak amongst like substance designer and like how that works? Because I have a question for Katie.
There's no substance designer for this. For this, for making smart materials?
For creating those procedural smart materials, like for making them.
That's a whole other thing, a whole other program. I wouldn't have time to get into that really. We might have time later in the semester when we talk about environment stuff mostly, but that's more.
I just had a question pertaining like what part of the process like what's happening to make that.
That'd be like the same thing, building up a library totally separate. It's its own job in industry. So if you're working in substance designer, in industry you're a texture artist and that's all you do. Like you're working in substance designer, building up these base materials for people to use and for the game to run on. Yeah?
Okay, if I'm being honest, like don't get me wrong, the realistic stuff does look really cool. But if I'm being honest, the art style that would like draw me in the most for like what I want to create would be like either like N64 PS1 or like PS2 GameCube era kind of.
That stuff I can't really cover here because the goal with the realistic stuff is just like if I was teaching you how to paint.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be teaching you how to draw anime first, for example.
Yeah.
Like you got to understand the foundations and the realism of it before you start knocking things back. It's the
Good
exact
point.
same way in 3D.
That's a good
Okay,
point.
so we're gonna start with the realistic, and then we can kind of knock back. And the thing is, most PS1 textures is just this, and you just downscale it a ton. So it's still built on the same principles, but anyway, for the majority of this course or any of the other courses, we are working from realism backwards.
That's a good point. Thank you. Thank you for bringing that up.
Cool. Okay, so this one might be a bit much. We'll see how it goes. I'm going to consider maybe we'll build a smart material together, and we'll see the kind of process of doing that. So we're going to build up something more complex than otherwise, okay? So let's delete this.
I need to delete everything back.
There's just this big delete button here. Garbage can, if you just spam it, it'll just run everything down. Yep.
kind of lost on getting small materials.
It's in this tab here.
I don't have, you can have a tab like that.
This should be the same in all the versions. It's in your asset browser. There's a tab for base materials and the smart materials. Okay.
Where would that could even be?
Your asset browser?
I can have the asset browser here. Oh, I guess you just stretch it out a lot.
It's just hidden. Okay. All right, so let's talk about the next tab. So that's smart materials and base materials. Let's move on to the next material, or next tab, sorry. This next tab is going to be smart masks. So just like those smart materials that are building on our mesh values, these smart masks are going to do the same thing. So that you can get rust and dirt and all these other kind of things. They do exist, but the nuance is going to be in combining these, changing them, and using them to your advantage, okay? Next is filters. So this is very similar to the filters that they have in Photoshop. You can actually add these to layers as well. Something like if you're in Photoshop and you hit the bevel filter, right? It can create sort of a bevel of something you've drawn. If you hit the blur filter, right? It's going to blur something. So if I go in here and make a paint layer and just quickly paint something on, okay, let's actually make the brush harder. If I right click now, okay, I'm not adding a mask. I'm right clicking inside of my actual paint layer. You'll see there's an option for add filter. And see, now underneath the paint layer, it's turning orange there. So this sublayer is for my paint layer, not for the mask. There is no mask. So if I go to filter, I have a bunch of different options for filters, similar to Photoshop. So I'm just going to click on blur. Okay, and now I can blur this layer. Just like a Photoshop filter. If I want to get rid of that, I can get rid of it. I can add a filter, and this time let's do bevel instead. Okay? And now it's beveling this the way, same thing as in Photoshop. Okay? There are a bunch of other filters that you can mess around with, but I'll leave that to you on your own time. For example, adding gradients or clamping, doing high passes, histogram, and levels adjustments.
I haven't lost how to even add filters now. Oh, wait, no, click.
It's just a right click and then filter.
Oh, you're supposed to click on the...
You have to click on the paint layer, yeah.
Okay, there.
Okay. Bunch of different filters, mirror, sharpen, warp, etc., etc., etc.
Okay, our filter layer, filter chooser is way different.
It might be different, but the filters should be the same, the ones that are there.
No, it isn't.
You'll have the same filters. I promise you that. You'll have blur, you'll have bevel, you'll have sharpen, you'll have histogram, all those classic ones.
No,
You do.
have normal pass through the same replace multiplied by and multiplied document like missing.
That's you're in here.
When I click to add a filter, that's what happened.
So add filter,
That's what I just did.
and then click on this here.
I don't get that view. There.
Check your properties tab.
I don't have a properties tab anywhere.
You can open it from window. Properties. Okay, and then you can find all your filters in here. Okay. The next tab is brushes. This should be pretty self-explanatory. This is just brushes. If you click on them, it will automatically assign them to your brush. So here's like a chalky brush. Here's one that replicates broken glass. Here's some charcoal brush, right? This works the same as Photoshop, just different brushes that you can use. Maybe you don't want that super hard round edge when you're doing your edge damage, so you can use a brush like this to sort of better get some variation, okay? Let's go back to where we were. I'm going to delete everything. And then another big one is your alphas. So in alphas, it's all of the different textures that we use to build those brushes and more, okay? You can also create your own alphas and drag them into the project super easily. So if you want to stencil something into an object, you can make an alpha in Photoshop, pump it in here, and then stencil it on. Then we have textures, which is where all of the textures live. There are a ton of built-in noise textures, and these are what we're going to be using. So after this, we'll go on for our live example, making some kind of base material, and we're using all of these elements to make it. So we've got all these different textures that are built in, and you'll see a lot of them have this little 3 dots, meaning they're changeable, so we can adjust them in the future. Some of them look like grunge or dirt or wear. Some of them look like checkered patterns and shapes. You can use them to recreate fabrics, to recreate rocks, to recreate even stylized materials. Okay? But it all stems from these textures. And then finally you have environments. This is just the environment for the scene and the lighting. We can ignore that for now. So let's use some of those materials we've built up, or some of those textures we just learned about, to build some kind of complex material. Let's pull up a reference. Always a good idea, pull up a reference. Anybody have any suggestions for a material we might make or stick on this object?
Beard.
Beard? Not human hair. You don't really make material for that. Bubble gum. Interesting. Concrete? Okay.
Like a basket.
A basket weave. Let's go with basket weave. Sorry, I did concrete for modeling 2, so if you actually want to watch that, you can literally just go to my YouTube and watch the modeling 2 lecture where I recreate concrete as a smart material, but it's a little bit more advanced, the stuff we get into there. So let's do basket weave. I think that could be an interesting one. So first and foremost, I'm going to start with a fill layer. So I'm just going to come over here to my fill layer tab. And all of my options are going to be here at the beginning. Let's go get rid of these 2. Okay, these 2 are just because it's a sample file. When we make our own files, it's not going to be there. Actually, let's do it from scratch, so we're all on the same kind of page. So I'm just going to make a new sphere to use as our demo. Okay, just made a sphere, that's it. I'm using the default UVs that it's already got, so I'm not going to bother with that. And I'm just going to export it. I'm just adding UV sphere. Really, it doesn't matter. It's just whatever model you have lying around, you can use to start making a material. I don't have any models lying around, so I'm going to use a sphere. You can, but I want to show you how to make a file from scratch because you haven't learned how to do that yet.
Okay. Makes sense.
So I'm going to go to File now for my sphere and just export it. So File, Export, and I'm going to go down to FBX here. So we learned a little bit, if you're here 2 classes ago, I think, about the differences, OBJ, FBX. I'm going to click on FBX, okay? And this object doesn't have any materials on it, so it'll just create a default one, that's fine. So export, FBX. I'm just going to go to my desktop. Now, I want to limit this to selected objects. I'm going to click that. I don't want it to export anything else in my scene. Even though there's nothing, this just is the safest way to do it. So selected objects. I'm going to click mesh. I don't want to export anything else other than the mesh data. And then down here, I'm just going to uncheck animation. Open the geometry tab and click normals only to face for better smoothing. You really shouldn't have to, sorry, you should already have settings that you like to use or whatever. This is just, I'm going over it again. So I'm gonna leave all that and I'm gonna export this as sphere to my desktop. And then we'll open Painter. Okay. There are a few things that we have to consider when we're making a new Painter file. I kind of explained them last week, but here's what we need to know in advance. We need to know, do we want to work in OpenGL or DirectX? So if you're working in Unity or Sketchfab or planning on importing this back to Blender, use OpenGL. If you're planning on using Unreal or Marmoset, or you're working at Ubisoft and working in Snowdrop for some reason, using DirectX. So I'm going to go to File, New in Painter. And in this case, let's just say I'm working on Unreal, which is what I'm primarily working in. I'm going to go to Template. So the first option here, we have a bunch of different templates that change our exports. For right now, I'm just going to worry about PBR. So if I scroll down, we'll find PBR, Metallic Roughness, Alpha Blend.
There's one that says Unity in it, so should we use that since we're working in Unity?
I would stick to this for now.
Okay.
We can change it to Unity when we export, but this way we know it's here. So PBR, Metallic Roughness, Alpha Blend. That means the channels that we're going to get to work with are Metallic, Roughness, and Alpha Blending for opacity. Right? So things we just learned about. If you don't use alpha blending, you can do alpha cutting, which is where your alpha is either 0 or 1, but that doesn't allow for opacity, right? So alpha blending allows for variable opacity. From here, I'm going to select my file, and I'm going to go to my desktop and, choose Sphere. Document resolution. This one's important. People love just clicking this and going, okay, my object should be 4K. It deserves it. It's going to look pretty. It needs 4K. Actually, it needs 8K. Actually, I need 6 materials on my object, all at 4K. And you laugh, but this has happened before to me. And then I download the poor file when I'm TAing and go, oh my God, this file is 600 megabytes. And it's like a golf ball. So, your object does not deserve, I hate to break it to you, a 4K texture, okay? None of your objects in modeling 1, okay, we're not even doing high polys and bakes yet, all right? So none of your objects deserve higher than 1024 right now. I will say that with absolute certainty, okay? We'll learn a little bit more about textile density later, where we might increase this a little bit, but rule of thumb, if you're submitting for this class, 1 or maybe 2 1K maps is good enough. Remember, you're not doubling every time. 1024 to 2048 is not double. It's quadruple. 2048 to 4096 is not double. It's quadruple. So the difference between a 1K map and a 4K map is actually 16 times the memory usage. You don't need all that. Okay, we'll learn a little bit more about where to use those high resolution maps later, but for now, general rule of thumb, please stay at 1K or 512. That should be enough for all your purposes right now. That's probably too low. Okay, normal map format, like I said, I'm going to pretend this is Unreal, so I'm going to leave it as DirectX. And then everything else, I'm going to leave. You might change physical size. It just helps with using your base meshes, but we're going to eyeball that anyway. So we can ignore that and just click OK. Your import menu, from what I know, is a little bit different looking in the newer versions, but the options that I've clicked, just these 3 are the only ones you really need either way. Click OK, and we're in. The UVs on this are not going to look fantastic because it's a sphere, but that's just how it is for spheres. Everything else I'm going to do now, feel free to follow along. It's going to be just step by step. We're going to build up this basket weave material. So there are a bunch of different things that we need to consider when we're building up this material. First, right, color, roughness, metalness, and then normal map / height map. In Painter, they kind of work the same, and then our AO. So let's work on them. We'll start by building a base. Okay? And we're thinking about the height first and foremost. So let's get the height working so we get that basket weave kind of texture to it. So we'll just call this base.
Is that specific to this, or you always start with height?
Depending on, most of your objects will have the height modeled in, so it's not a huge deal. Basket weave in particular, because there's so much height variation, I'm going to start with height. Normally I probably wouldn't, but because basket weave is a material that has a lot of height, if it's just plastic and maybe you just want to add some bumpiness to the plastic later, that's a lot easier to do from a later stage. So the order is usually not that important, it's just in this case it's going to be. So I'm going to add a new fill layer. I call this base. This is what everything's going to be built up on top of. Okay, so I just added a new fill layer here. You can double click to change the name of something quick. Base. Boom. By default, it's affecting color, height, roughness, metalness, normal, opacity, emissive, right? Everything we need. I don't need it to affect emissive, so I'm going to uncheck that, right? If it's grayed out, it's if it's light, sorry, it's taking effect. And opacity, I also don't need it to affect opacity, so I'm just going to click on that. Okay, so it's affecting color, height, roughness, metalness, and normal. I don't want to start with some kind of weave in here. We have them, but I want to show you to build your own materials, right? It's possible. So I'm going to ignore material mode, and I'm just going to dump straight down here to base color. So for base color, doesn't really matter right now. I'm just going to leave it as white. For height, we do need to make some adjustments. So inside of height here, I can click, and I can fill the height with the texture. It doesn't have to be this 0 to 1 slider, this fill. I can fill it with the texture. And this is where I can kind of get in and find one of those weaves. So there are a few different kinds that we could do. Of all of them, the one that looks the most basket weavy to me is probably going to be this one. Right? So figuring out which one of these you need to use is just going to come with time as you get more familiar with the assets that are already in Painter. Right? So I knew there was already a wave material. I can use this to get started. So if I click this now, okay, you'll see it looks terrible because it's only tiling one time here. So we can change these parameters. Underneath pattern, I've got an option for tiling, and we can bump this up a bunch. Okay. A sphere was not a fantastic example for this because the UVs are kind of whack, but it still kind of works. Okay, so we look at our map. Here it is. Looks pretty good. If I want more details on my height map that I just put in here, I can go from my material view in the top right and find my height view, and this is what that's actually looking like. Okay. So now as I move the light around, you can see it's kind of replicating that. It's at a fairly low resolution, so we're not getting all the same smoothness that it had otherwise, but it still works. All the other properties we're going to set too. So all these other properties are affecting the entire basket weave, right? Do we want our basket weave to be really smooth, or do we want our basket weave to be pretty rough? I would generally like to believe, or I could pull up a reference, that a basket weave material is probably going to be somewhere in the rougher side of things, right? They're typically made of fabric or wood. So I'm going to take the roughness and then bump it up to something like this, right? I don't know, somewhere in that range. Metallic is next, and this is easy because we know we have a metallic value of 0. It's not metallic, it's basket weave. Okay. We can adjust things like the histogram position to change where our masking is happening. We can up it a little bit, maybe to get a little bit of an uneven pattern going. Okay. And let's just call this a fine base. So let's build on top of this. I can only change the parameters in each of these once, and generally it's going to be on this global scale. But we can actually overlay a bunch of these together to get more finite details. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new fill layer now. Okay. And we'll change the base color of our bottom layer to something a little bit more baskety. I don't really know what color baskets are. Let's just go with something like that. Okay. This new fill layer, we're going to use it very intentfully. So we're going to add a different fill layer for every property that we want to change. So in this case, I'm going to get rid of everything except for color. I want this to be just a color layer. This is where we're going to add our color variation. Yep.
I'm changing the color of the first base and it's not doing anything.
Did you add the other layer on top of it?
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yep. So this second layer, we're going to add a mask to. The base layer doesn't need a mask because it's applying to everything. So let's add a mask to this second layer. The second layer is only affecting color. So let's use some color variation. So I'm going to add a fill to my black mask here. Fill to the black mask. So I've added the black mask, and then by right-clicking, I can come down here and click Add Fill, and that'll add a fill layer to my black mask. But this fill layer is only in grayscale, right? Because it's part of the mask. So if I go to my mask view now, which is gray. I can adjust it here. But what I want to do with my fill layer is add some kind of texture or noise that we can use for color variation. So when I'm thinking basket or weave, right, I'm probably going to have some kind of lines along my weaves, maybe. Maybe we'll have some kind of anisotropic noise. Right, so anisotropic noise is very linear. Works well for things like tree bark or skid marks on the street. Very linear noise. This one's a bit tricky. This is something I'd probably do a bit more in Designer, but you can see we've got our weaves going in different direction. It's almost going to be impossible to mask out properly, but let's just go with this for now. Back to our material view. Now we've got this anisotropic noise kind of going across. And anywhere that it's white in our mask here, it's going to let our second color shine through. So this is a little bit aggressive right now. What I want to do is take our second color and change the blending mode of the layer to multiply. So this works just like a multiply layer in Photoshop or anything else. It's going to multiply the pixels together. So now I'm getting a much more subtle effect, and I can change the opacity and make it even less or even more, or however you want to do it. Great. So we'll call this color variation. Don't think I have the time to do it, but you could theoretically go in and mask out each directional strand. That's more of a Substance Designer thing, but you could mask out each directional strand and then have one color variation to have the strands going up and down, the other one side to side to really match the texture. I don't think that's even something possible in Painter, but so we'll go with this for now. So that's color variation. So now I want to do that again, but for a different property. So I'm going to add a new fill, add a black mask, all the same. It's going to be the same process for everything you do. And then in this fill layer, okay, let's use something like a dirt. Something like this, sure. Okay, so it's just creating a little bit of noise on it. If I go to my mask, you can see what's going on. I don't want this to affect the color though. I want this one to affect the roughness. So I'm going to call this one roughness variation.
Excuse me, how do you see only the mask?
If you click up here in the top right and you're selected on a mask, you can scroll down and you'll find mask view. So back to material view now. For this layer, I'm going to get rid of color and height and metal and everything else. I just want it to affect the roughness.
I don't see any of that for this new fill layer.
And now as I adjust it, you can kind of see it's changing where the fill is based on this mask. Yep.
I don't see that menu for new fill layer. Yeah.
This menu?
No, the menu where you're changing the roughness and everything.
This one here? It's the properties tab.
Okay. Just went back to it and now it's there.
Yep. Okay. You have to make sure you're clicked on it. Otherwise it won't be there. Okay, so now we've added a little bit of roughness variation. Okay. We have something that's sort of starting to look like a basket weave. Let's check on our roughness channel. And we see it's missing something. It's not really interacting with the actual weaves of the basket at all. So let's do something where we can interact with the weaves of the basket. I'm going to switch my layer view from base color. Okay, we can actually change our blend modes for every single different property. So I'm going to change from base color to roughness here. And then I can change this to multiply. Right now it's not really doing anything because it's still just built on top of this base for our roughness. But now instead of this flat value, I'm going to use this same weave.
Marcus,
Yep.
mine just become a gray sphere.
After changing the roughness,
Yeah,
does your base have a roughness value?
it does.
And then this one here, you set it to multiply?
Yeah.
So then you might have something in your color variation layer still. It might be set to roughness here still when it shouldn't be.
Where?
This color variation layer is only affecting color.
No, I only have color.
You only have color?
Yeah.
And it's turning gray in your roughness channel?
Yeah.
I'm not exactly sure then.
Don't worry.
Try to follow along for now and then I'll come over if it's still happening later.
Yeah.
So let's go down to my base. And we made our tiling here 10. I'm just going to make it 10 again here. Normally this isn't something that I would do. There's another way to do this, but we'll just work with this. So I'm going to copy all the values down.
It was white.
That'll do it.
It used to be black. This fucking color.
Gotcha.
Sorry. No.
So my two materials should be matching now. Except they're not. What is going on with you? I used the wrong one, that's why. Oopsies. This one. Now they should be the same. Okay. And I'm going to adjust it in this manner because the parts, right, if we think about the material, you should be using reference when we're doing this. The parts, after the basket is weaved, right, we're going to have this lacquer on our weaved bits. So the part that are sticking out, parts like this here, it's going to interact with the environment a lot. People's hands are going to touch it. That lacquer is going to wear down over time. But areas like in between here, that lacquer is not going to wear down nearly as much. So when we have a roughness map like this, what we're saying is, okay, those protruding parts, they should be rougher than the grooves. Now these grooves are still too dark, so I'm going to use the histogram node to sort of see if we can adjust that, and if not, then we'll have to use the position. So we'll kind of adjust it like this. So we're happy kind of with how it looks. Okay, so now it's very shiny in these dark areas and very not shiny in the other areas. But it still looks a little bit funky. Okay. So what we can do here is I'm just going to do more or less the same thing with the color, but for the weave separately. Yep.
Can you just go back a bit, sir, with the form of like making your texture appear on the roughness map?
So this, I just in the roughness channel repeated what I did in the height channel.
Yeah.
So if I go down here, by default the roughness is just blank. If I find weave 4, which is the one I used there, and then I'm just making the tiling 10, because that's what we had, to make the same as this. 0.69, and I can adjust this.
Oh, okay, sorry. I thought you were using gradient for dart. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Yeah, no, I just basically recreated it. That's not a fantastic way to do it. Okay, a material like this, normally you wouldn't even do it this way anyway. Okay. The other thing we want is we want darker areas in between. So I'm going to make a new fill layer and call this ambient occlusion. And again, this one's only going to affect color. I'm going to make it black, or like close to black. Okay. Now we're going to do a little bit of layer stacking inside of our mask. So I'm going to use that same weave. I want to use that same weave again. Okay. We could use anchor points, but that's a whole other thing. So I'm going to add a black mask. It's my ambient occlusion fill layer. I'm going to add another fill. And then inside this fill, I'm actually going to use that weave again, because you'll notice that weave, it's got those areas that are dark there, that black part, and we want to kind of replicate that. So what we can do is put this weave in a mask and then invert it. So our mask is only doing the areas that are dark currently. So we're going to actually stack 2 layers on top of each other. So let's change this now to 10 to match our stuff. And you can see right now it's going on the tops. Kind of adjust it to match a bit better. If I right click again, right, this is a sub-layer stack. It still works like layers. So we can add a layer on top of it as a filter. So here, there's a node called levels. Levels is going to work the same as it does in Photoshop here as well, where we can adjust the output values of our texture. And in this case, for levels, there's a little button here that says invert. So if I invert this, now it's going to affect the other part, right? So the parts that were black turn white. So if I go to my mask view, that's what it looks like. If it's black, it's now white. So now I have this darkening effect in between my weave, which is great. Okay, I'm mostly looking at the 2D view, so I might even just do this. Right, we've got these darker areas in between the weaves. Let's take it a step further. And add some more scratches and dirt and grime and all that kind of thing. So I'm going to add a new fill layer. And this is where the differences kind of come in between making layers for individual properties and making layers for a new kind of material. So all of these were for changing individual properties. We did color variation, roughness variation, added ambient occlusion to the color on top of it. This next one, dirt. If we think about adding dirt on top of our basket weave, okay, this dirt it's not going to share that same roughness that we had below. We don't want it to multiply that roughness, right? This dirt has its own roughness value. It's going to be pretty rough. It's dirt. It's going to have its own color, totally separate. So we're essentially going to make a new base. This one's going to be for our dirt on top. So let's call this one dirt. And I do want this one to affect color, height, roughness, right? Still not metalness or normal low opacity or emissions, so I'm going to turn all that off. Okay. So this dirt layer, I'm going to go ahead and add a black mask. I'm going to add a new fill layer to my dirt, just like we've been doing. Should be pretty familiar with this now. And then under grayscale, I'm going to look through until I find a texture that kind of speaks to me here. So in our texture search, we'll look through. There are a bunch called dirt. We don't even have to use one that's called dirt. We could just find directional noise or some other grunge. Here's some grunge for concrete or other things. Really, the name of it doesn't matter. Just see if it kind of matches the look you're going for. Now, because this is a lacquered object, I would think like it would wear in a bit of a different way, or where would the dirt kind of fall into here? So let's just go with this one, concrete dirty. But it does create some nice variation. Let's check out our mask. Okay. In the 2D view here, we have this transformation rectangle, so I can actually kind of move it around if I want. So if you find a particular pattern you like better, you can move it around. In this case, I'm just going to leave it the way it is. On top of this concrete, not on top, sorry. As a part of this concrete, we have a few parameters that we can work with as well. So underneath here, we have balance, which is going to adjust how much of the texture is black or white. So moving it to the left brings us more to the black values. Moving it to the right moves us more to the white values. In this case, I'm going to move it more to the black values because I don't want this dirt everywhere on our basket weave, maybe just in some areas like this. And then you have contrast, which is just going to change the contrast. I don't know how to describe that in simpler terms, but the areas that are bright will stay brighter, while the areas that are dark will get darker. Okay. Then we can add some rotation variation or something else to create a more interesting texture. So something like this maybe is more interesting to me. And we go out, we can kind of see where our dirt is. Just to make it obvious, I'm going to make the dirt bright red, and now we can really see where the dirt is. So let's take this dirt now and change its properties to make it match dirt a little bit better. I'm going to make it kind of grayish, brown. I'm going to give it a tiny bit of height, and you can see the height really makes it stand out in the lighting. It's in the properties, same place. And then the dirt is going to be very rough. So I'm going to pump this up here to a much higher value. And you can see how it's kind of affecting my roughness map here. Okay, it's not affecting it a ton, but you can see the splotches. If we want more dirt, we can always go back and readjust that concrete fill. Okay. And the great thing about working this way with the fill layers and the mask is, let's say that we decide we don't even like the way this this texture really looks for dirt and mud or whatever, we can always change it. So instead of grunge concrete dirty, we can just change it to something else. And try again without losing any progress really. So let's try dirt 1 instead. Take a look. Do we like dirt 1? Maybe not. Let's try dirt 4. Do we like dirt 4? Maybe we do. Then we can hop back into our mask and adjust it again. Okay. So now we can see our dirt on the base color. We can see our dirt in the height, a smidge. We can see our dirt in the roughness, sorry. And so all in all, we end up with a material that is kind of basket weave in dirt. Basket weave is a pretty complex material, so it's not something I'd probably even do in Painter normally, but it was a fun little experiment. What do we do from here? So I've got my basket weave material. It's a fine little base material. Maybe it's on an actual basket. What I can do is quickly turn this into a new base material, though, that we can use on other projects. So if I select everything, up here there's a little folder icon. If I click that, it'll add a new group. Okay. Oh. Then I can select everything. I'm just using shift click, like as if it's Windows File Explorer. So shift click. Okay. And I'm going to drag all this into that group. So now I can just call this entire group like basket weave. Okay. Then I can right click on this group. And down here I can create smart material. So if I right click on the group, create smart material. And it'll pop up in my smart material library. So it's saved to your disk. You can share it between computers. You can give it to other people. I believe the file folder or the file format is called an SBAR file or an SBSAR. Anyway, so with this smart material now, if I go back, so I'm going to discard the project. That should be fine. I'm going to go back to that preview sphere. Okay. Delete everything in here. And you see my basket weave material, because it's saved in my disk, is still here, and I can just plop it on. Okay. And now I've got this basket weave material on this object. Okay. And then it's going to work just the same as everything else. So if I just want this on one part, I'm going to add a black mask to this whole group. Right, so it's got all of these inside of it with their own masks. But I'm going to add a mask to the entire group, and now it'll work just like it did before. So I can add this and just do it to this portion, or just do it to the other portion, or vice versa. Okay. I can also come in here and change any of the properties that I made from earlier. So I can change the color of it. I can change the dirt color. I can remove the ambient occlusion. I can make it red. I could change the roughness variation texture. I could change the color variation texture. Okay? But I had that smart material I built to give me a really good base to jump off from, make things super quick. Okay? Everybody still kind of with me on that? For the most part? Cool. I hope you have fun making your own kind of base materials and smart materials and try things out. Now, the one thing I didn't cover with you today is how to really start on an object, right? This was mostly theory, and we built up these things in a bubble. Okay, not on an actual object. I just made that sphere, but I wouldn't count that as an actual object. In the lab, Josiah should go over how to build up from scratch using these masks right from the beginning. So we're going to segment our objects out right away before we add all these layers, where we already have our mask set up in a way that works. So hopefully in context, you'll be able to do something like that. If we go to the slides for the final slide. Okay, activity 5 is going to be prop design. So this is definitely one of the more involved activities, but you do have reading week break after, so I kind of planted it here specifically. And as a note, there are 10 weekly activities and 12 weeks. So week 11 and 12, there are no weekly activities. I know you got exams and stuff, so don't worry about it back then. That's why we're doing it now. So this one is more involved, yes, but there's also more time to do it. I'll probably even extend it past, right now it's still due on Thursday because they just are all set by that by default. I'll probably extend it into reading week just in case you want to play around with it. I don't want to bog down your reading week. Take that break, submit early, try to submit Thursday night anyway, but if you would like to go back, rewatch the lecture, try rewatching the lab, I'll make this weekly activity due next Thursday during reading week, as if it was next week's weekly activity, okay? But again, I don't want to bog down your reading week, so please do it early. As far as the actual assignment itself, pretty simple. Make a prop. Design whatever you want. It doesn't have to be like something from a game. It doesn't have to be entirely your own creation. Maybe you want to do some fan art, something like that. That works for me. If I find it... Oh. Okay, so design and create a prop, super simple. I made this one in the lab last week during my office hours because nobody was there, so I was just sitting there. It's just the outlets that they have on the desk. It's not complex, it's not crazy, it's just following the process. I want to get you used to following this process step by step because you're going to be doing it a lot. So make the model, UV it, show me your seams and your checker pattern material, and then texture and painter, kind of the way we just kind of did. And hopefully with more experience from Josiah's lab, you'll be able to do something like this in a relatively short period of time. So that's all I need from you. It doesn't have to be something super complex. My only request, if you read it up there, it just says, please pick something real. Preferably something not abstract, preferably something that has, not necessarily something you own, not necessarily something that's like an actual object in real life, but something physical and tangible and makes sense, right? If you do a sword from near, do a sword from near, but it's still a thing, you know what I mean? Don't do a blob with textures on it. A golf ball's a real thing, go for it. It's not a blob with textures on it.
For the holes in your model,
Yes.
do you kind of just paint it on?
Well, I did, but you can make a stencil and do it that way too. There are a few things. I really wish there was more to more time to go over that more in-depth stuff, but with only having one class to cover texturing, we are leaving a lot of stuff out.
So could you do it with like faces and then just like those little squares?
Yep, you can do that too, but this way you end up with way less texture or way less geometry, right? So this is just one face.
Yeah.
So I don't have to worry about that. So I just did, I just went into Photoshop and made this in like 3 seconds. I just used it as an alpha for my brush. All right, so I kind of skipped over that kind of stuff, assuming you have Photoshop experience already and like know how to paint and things like that. I don't know if you do or not. I just kind of assume, so that is kind of my bad, but we just don't have time to cover all that stuff too. So that stuff, hopefully you have experience with already, or you can Google on your own time. The painter stuff, hopefully this was enough of a demo for you to sort of get your teeth into it and really start practicing. Okay. Any questions regarding all of that stuff? Cool. So you now know assignment 2 is open. Assignment week number 5 is due next Thursday. I'll change it literally right in front of you so you know I'm not lying to you. I know. So we'll just bump that to the 16th. Okay, perfect. All right, no questions. So thank you, everyone. Good luck with all of your texturing adventures.